This month, our True Crime Club here at the Chippewa River District Library had the great pleasure of visiting with the author of one of our books. David DeKok is an author and journalist out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and he writes narrative nonfiction about small American towns, their people, and their crises. He has written several books, including Murder in the Stacks, Penn State, Betsy Aardsma, and The Killer Who Got Away. He joined us over Zoom for an enlightening discussion on Betsy Aardsma's case. Stay tuned to hear David's story on writing the book, followed by questions and discussion with members of our library's True Crime Club.
Uh, she was a very typical, young woman from Holland. Her parents had both gone to Hope College. That's where they had met, and that's also where I and my parents went to college. So I do have some connections there. My sister knew her younger sister. They were their Facebook friends, but I did not know Betsy, personally. And Holland was really, I mean, it was just such a shock, when the Holland Evening Sentinel was delivered on Saturday, November 29th, and there at the top of the page was the headline that she had been murdered, in a library at Penn State University in State College, Pennsylvania. She was stabbed to death, one stab into the chest, and was probably essentially dead before she hit the floor. But they took her to the campus medical center. There wasn't a real hospital there, and she was pronounced dead there. And it was a shock for Holland. It was a shock for Penn State. I mean, at that time, thankfully, there weren't mass shootings on campuses anymore. Penn State really didn't even have a way to notify students who mostly were away for the Thanksgiving break that this had happened. Some of them saw it in news stories in their local newspapers, when they were home that weekend. But other than that, many of them didn't find out until they got back. That would not happen today. But it and students were shaken. I mean, it's really shaken because they think of the library as a safe place. They all had to go there at some time or another. And yet it was also a library that had a kind of a scary vibe, a scary reputation. The stacks where the murder took place were, claustrophobic and dark, and this never went away. They Even today you'll hear rumors about the girl that was killed in the library, but so it I got involved. Well, of course, I was 14 years old when the murder took place. I regularly read the newspaper, and I think what shocked me the most was that picture of her, the one that's on the cover of my book, which was her University of Michigan senior class picture. And I mean, she doesn't look like a murder victim. She looks like a very attractive young woman, not the type of people you think of as getting murdered, and Holland had very, very few murders, and those that they did have tended to be outsiders, not people from, the core population, the Dutch population there. And so I I didn't really do anything. I mean, it was in the paper from, that Saturday until the following Wednesday when her funeral took place. And then it just kind of went away. When I was doing my research, I looked, on anniversaries and things like that to see, whether the Sentinel would do anything more, but they didn't, not for many, many years. So I kind of forgot about it. In the meantime, I graduated from Hope College and got a job in journalism in Pennsylvania. And I worked at one paper in Shamokin, Pennsylvania for 12 years, and then got a job after my first book was published about the Centralia mine fire. It was called Unseen Danger. The title today is Fire Underground. But I got a job at the Harrisburg Patriot News, the state capital newspaper. And And it was there, not right away, but into like the late 1990s or so. We started getting a lot of young reporters from Penn State who were graduates from the Penn State Journalism School, and they talked about the Betsy Aardsma murder. And I came to realize that this was still a topic of some interest, on the Penn State campus. And so I didn't do anything about it for several years. I think one of our reporters did do a story on one of the anniversaries, and actually talked to Mrs. Aardsma when she was still willing to talk to the press, Betsy's mother. And so, but in 2008, there were more discoveries being made by independent researchers about the murder, and I knew that I was probably going to be leaving the paper soon because they were planning a big buyout of staff, and I knew that I would probably be pushed toward a buyout. And so I got permission to do a story on where the Aardsma investigation stood in the fall of 2008. And at that point, it hadn't really changed that much. I mean, they had the stories, they had the rumors about it. Many people thought it was two men that the state police were looking for. Well, that wasn't true. It was actually just one. But and so once I got permission, I started making phone calls to every friend of Betsy's from high school and college that I could find. Both from Holland High School, from Hope College, where she went for 2 years, and then from University of Michigan. And of course, I called the Aardsma family and got a very cold, hostile reception, I was kind of surprised because, I mean, I was from Holland, so I thought that they would be a little bit more, open at least, or trusting, but no, I think they may have had bad experiences with some of the other writers working, on this story over the years. And I also wondered, after Mrs. Aardsma made some very negative comments about Penn State in 1989 for the 20th anniversary of her daughter's murder, after that, nobody in the family said anything. It really made me wonder, the more I thought about it, whether Penn State had settled with them, given them a financial settlement, basically to shut up and stop, bad mouthing the university, because they never said a word, after that. And I don't know, it could be anything, but they did stop talking. I was able to talk to like a cousin, the ex-husband of Betsy's sister Carol, who was actually very, very helpful, because he was there in the house when Reverend Van Ostenburg, brought the news that she had been murdered. And so he was very helpful in that regard, and he loved Betsy, and would talk to me endlessly. And then there were a couple of scattered cousins and aunts here and there who talked to me, but most of the information I got about her came from her friends, and they were, they had loved her. They really did. She was a great person. She was really a golden girl, and and so they told me stories from elementary school up through University of Michigan, and so I was able to put together that initial series that I did in 2008 for the Patriot News. Now, at that time, I'd always like to say that the Pennsylvania State Police were cooperative and helpful, for my story. They were not. Institutionally, they were very hostile. Pennsylvania has one of the weakest open records laws in the country, and they were able to withhold the entire 1,700-page Betsy Aardsma investigative file. There was nothing I could do about it. But I did find that the individual state troopers, the ones obviously who were still alive, who had worked on the Aardsma case, were very helpful, very willing to talk. They regretted not having been able to solve the case, back then. And so I interviewed as many of them as I could find. The one who would not talk to me, though, was Sergeant George Keebler. He was the lead investigator, on the Aardsma murder. And after the articles were published in November of 2008, one day I got a surprise phone call from Sergeant Keebler, and he said, "Hey, I liked your series. If you're going to do a book on it, I'll be happy to talk to you." So, well, great. And he was great. I interviewed him several times. After the first time didn't go quite as well because I didn't realize he had an odd vocal tick of he would start talking at a normal level and then his voice would trail off like this, and my tape recorder didn't pick it up. So I lost sections of it, and I had to ask the same questions again at the second interview. By which time I had gotten what's called a lav mic, which attaches to the lapel, of the person you're interviewing. And after that, it was no more problem. But he was very, very frank, very candid. There were only a couple of questions that he would not answer. One of those was he had told about some higher up in the state police who, during this long investigation, had said, "George, you got to take all those books out of the library. Find that knife." And this is a huge library with hundreds of thousands of books. It was a ridiculous request made by somebody who had never been there. And so he just kind of said, "That's just not possible," but he would not tell me who that higher up was. But other than that, he was generally, very helpful, as were, like I said, the other troopers I interviewed. I would also like to say that Penn State University was helpful to me, and that would not be true either. They were extremely unhelpful. The first time I went to the university archives, so I knew they had a folder of Betsy Aardsma material there, and I wanted to see if they had other folders in their archives. And as soon as I told them what I wanted and what I was doing, I mean, you got the eye rolls. They were just like, "Oh, here's another one," and because there had been some people who were a little bit squirrely who had, looked into this case. And but what was odd about the archives there was that, okay, you got to realize that during this investigation, there were 40 state troopers on campus for a month. They interviewed more than 2,500 faculty and students, trying to figure out who committed this awful crime. And there was not a single Penn State document in the archives directly related to that investigation. No report, nothing like a report that would say, "Well, hey, here's what the state police are looking at now," that sort of thing. Totally unbelievable that those documents were not created. I mean, I've done research in other institutions' archives, and I know, I mean, they document everything. And the president of Penn State, Eric Walker, wrote memos to the file about this, that, and the other thing, including the weather, but not one single memo about this horrible trauma that was occurring on his campus. He sent condolence letters to more than half a dozen people in the first few months of 1970, but not to the Aardsma family, at least not that was in the archives. The copies of the other ones were there, but nothing that would indicate that he had ever sent anything to the Aardsma family. He supposedly thought that she was a campus radical, part of the SDS that was causing problems on campus. And she was, like many students at that time, she was against the Vietnam War and she was for civil rights. And she has spoken at one teach-in on campus against the war. But I actually interviewed the guy who was the president of the Penn State SDS chapter, and he said she was not one of us, So this was just, Eric Walker was just a kind of a paranoid guy and not very helpful. But so anyway, there was nothing there from them, just that folder of some news clippings and a few press releases. That was really it. And jump forward. This was in 2009 when I'm talking about now. Jump forward to the summer of 2010, and the cold case officer for the state police, the one assigned to the Aardsma investigation, her name was Trooper Lee Barrows, told the Aardsma family that she now believed that Betsy had been murdered by Richard Hafner, a fellow graduate student. She had a number of good reasons for saying that. Hafner had actually been whispered about as a potential suspect as early as 1986, when he came to the attention of novelist Pamela West, who never wrote anything directly about it because she feared being sued. She did write a kind of a weird science fiction novel, about this, but nothing that would have identified Richard Hafner. But and then a couple of other people, one by the name of Sasha Skuchik, who was an adjunct Penn State English professor, and Derek Sherwood, an interested citizen. They found out some more details about Hafner based on what Pamela West had told them. Now, I heard about Hafner in August of 2010 from a close friend of Kathy Aardsma, the younger sister. Kathy had actually talked about Trooper Barrows as telling them about Hafner when she went to her high school class reunion in Holland that summer. And one of her fellow alumni took the story to a Holland beauty salon operated by Angela Wick, who was the sister of Peggy Wick, who was a close friend of Betsy, whom I had interviewed for the newspaper series. And Angela told Peggy, and Peggy emailed me. And I immediately contacted people who knew Betsy, and one of them confirmed that this had all gone on. And so I contacted Trooper Barrows, who said a meeting on the case was going to be held that afternoon. And then the state police disavowed her. They told me, for the record, that they were not close to solving the case. I don't believe them, but they, like I said, they have not been very helpful. The state police had actually long focused on another student by the name of Larry Paul Maurer, another classmate of Betsy, and somebody, Maurer, who seemed bound and determined to make the police believe that he was her killer. They went to interview him. Two troopers went to interview him in his dorm room, and they were talking to him. And one of the troopers noticed on this wooden chair, the arm of the wooden chair, Maurer had carved the words, "Here sits death in the guise of man." And they asked him about that, and he said, "Oh, I just thought it was a cool saying." And they asked him if he carried a knife, and he said, "Yes, I use it for cutting cheese." And so they went back to the campus headquarters, for the investigation, all excited. They were sure that they found the killer, and they even hauled him in for a lie detector test, and he passed with flying colors. And he, I really wonder, Maurer seemed like a real life version of a character named David Parker in the original version of the movie The Boston Strangler. Parker was an attention-seeking young actor who taunted the police, dropping hints that maybe he was the killer, but he was not. That movie was actually playing in State College the month of the investigation at a second-run movie theater. And so they could never get enough evidence on Maurer to even come close to arresting him. He went on to have a long career with the National Security Agency, the NSA, and he eventually, during a lie detector test there by an investigator who knew one of the troopers involved in the Aardsma investigation, was put on the spot about Betsy Aardsma during that polygraph, but again passed. He was just I just think he was an attention-seeking nut job, and Around the same time, I learned of Chris Hafner, a younger cousin of Richard, who knew his cousin well and who took me much further into the case and provided further confirmation about Richard's role in the Aardsma murder. Richard was an awful pedophile. He was the scion of a once wealthy and prominent brewing family in Lancaster that had gone to seed. He regularly abused boys, including his cousin Chris on one occasion. He was put on trial and convicted of two of those molestations, but one on appeal. And he sued anyone who crossed him. He had figured out along the way that it was real easy to fill out the paperwork for a lawsuit. He didn't even have to pay the filing fee because he could prove he was a pauper. And he would just do this because he knew that it would turn the life over of the person he was suing, because they had to hire a lawyer then to answer the suit. If they did not, Hafner could get a default judgment and collect. And he did this for years and years. And like I said, just an awful person. He finally died in 2002. So I present my argument in my book for why I believe Hafner killed Betsy Aardsma, and will answer any questions you might have. As a closing note, on December 15, 2017, working for Reuters, I covered a news conference in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, which is the county seat of Center County, where Penn State is. The press conference was by the then district attorney, Stacey Parks Miller. It was about a fatal fraternity hazing case, and not the Aardsma murder. But afterwards, she took me aside. She had reached out previously to say that she really liked the book. And she said, "I have something to tell you." And she said that she believed my theory about Hafner, as did other people. And she and the state police cold case officer, who may still have been Trooper Barrows or it may have been somebody else, they wanted to do a press conference before December 31, when the district attorney Miller was leaving office. She had been defeated for re-election. And she said, "I thought it was important to let the public know there wasn't a killer wandering around," she said. But the state police barred their cold case officer from participating in that news conference. Their reason for this was that they don't identify killers who are dead. And Miller did not feel that she could do the news conference by herself. She told me a few other things that made me feel even better about my book, but I can't tell you what they are because of the restrictions she placed on it. And that said, I will take your questions.
Thank you very, very much, David. And I have to say, as you were speaking about specifically how you got to interview a lot of Betsy's friends, I feel like I can see that in how I read the book. I do feel like I really got a sense for Betsy. And I one thing that struck me about the book was that she, as a person, and I think this entire generation, really felt that they were at the precipice of all of these different organizations that you've talked about, stuck between civil rights and the Vietnam War, and being this good religious girl from a small town in Michigan, and caught between the university and how the university felt about students at the time. And I really feel like that is all very well captured in the book, which I really appreciated.
One thing I tried to do, and I'm doing this with my current book too, is trying to make the victim into a human being. Too often in true crime books, the victim stays the victim. You really don't know a heck of a lot, about them. And I wanted to show why people cared about her, why they took this as a tremendous loss, why they were still angry after, 40 years at the minister who spoke at her funeral, because he had not treated her, with the kind of love and affection that they had. And so it's something I tried to do, and fortunately was able to do it in this case.
Yes, absolutely. And then I'm just going to open it up for questions. If you have a question, you can raise your hand. We've got a group over here. You guys are not on camera, but you have your own microphone if you want to grab it. Does anybody else have a question to start? Yeah. Okay. I'll pass to you.
So obviously the Sandusky scandal was not
Yeah.
that long ago, and it was kind of obviously a cover up. And it looks like Penn State has a lot of different issues with cover ups.
Yes, they
Do you
do.
think that's something that is continuing today, or do you think that the whole Sandusky thing was one of the last ones and kind of it opened up? And then also, do you think that the reason that Penn State got rid of all of the communications and all of the documentation was so that they couldn't be FOIA'd? I know FOIA wasn't around back then, but so it wasn't, they couldn't say, we don't know what they can easily say, we don't know what you're talking about today. Because
Right. Sandusky was interesting. He was actually, I think 69 was one of his first years as a defensive line coach at Penn State. And I never saw any evidence that Richard Hafner was one of Sandusky's, sexual partners, but who knows? But in any case, I'd like to say that Penn State has seen the light, and as far as exposing or allowing to be exposed on-campus scandals, but I'm just not really seeing it. They're so used to immunity. They are the 800-pound gorilla in that town. They are the economy, and virtually everybody in that town either works for or is impacted by Penn State, and it's probably this. It might be the same in Ann Arbor with the University of Michigan, but it certainly
Yeah,
is.
I can say we live in a college town. Mount Pleasant, Michigan is a college town. Not nearly as big of a college, but we're relating to what you're saying, I'd say.
Okay. All right. But as far as why they took or never allowed the documents to come into the archives, normally the way it works there, or at least I was told, is that documents are not public for 20 years, but after 20 years, they're opened up. And with that, if there's no documents there to open up, they're not going to be opened up. They actually, Pennsylvania did improve its Freedom of Information Act in around 2007, 2008, in that period. And it was better than it was before. Still very weak in some ways, especially with law enforcement documents. But Graham Spanier, the president of Penn State, lobbied the legislature for Penn State to be largely exempt from that law. They have to reveal the salaries of some of the top earners at the school, but that's it. And I know from personal experience that that's not true at every university. That like I used the FOIA Act in South Carolina to try to get some documents about Richard Hafner when he was teaching down there briefly, and it worked. But Pennsylvania is just a very backward state, when it comes to freedom of information. And so, I would love to have be able to read through that 1,700-page Betsy Aardsma case file, but I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah.
I would point out just one other thing quickly, is that the FBI releases virtually all of their case files. I think it's after 25 years. They're presumed open. If there's a specific reason they can show why that needs to be closed beyond, we don't want you to see it, they can do that. But most of their documents are open and accessible after 25 years.
Yeah, I have to say, as I was reading through the book, there were several moments, especially, and I don't know if you guys felt this way too, as we're learning about, and I am blanking on his name, but the professor who uh, Richard went to the night after the
Lauren Wright.
murder.
Lauren
Yeah,
Wright. Yeah.
yes, and how he does not come forward for so long,
I
and
know. Yeah.
and then when he does, he's like thinking of all these people to go to, and he goes to all of these people at Penn State. And I mean, I do not work for a huge university, so maybe I don't know, but I was thinking like I would go to the police, like even if it were someone
Well,
related to
yeah.
my job, it would be police. And it really, I really felt like in my head, I'm thinking like, am I just like making this connection because we're talking about Penn State, or does this just feel like a Joe Pa situation? Like it really feels
Mhm.
like those two cases echoed each other
Yeah.
a little bit at different times. So anyway, does anyone else have any? I don't. I'll take up the mic the whole time. So does anyone else have any more questions? Okay. Well, if you think about it, let me know. Um, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about growing up in Holland.
Mhm.
I know personally, as I was reading through the book, I was a little surprised by some of the things you talked about in Holland, Michigan, because I think for us as Michiganders, we know of Holland, but it's kind of, you know, a fun festival town, you know, right, wooden shoes and tulips, and we may have been there, but I don't think we think of it as being kind of how you
Strange
described
religious
it,
place. Yeah.
extremely religious. And
Yeah.
yeah, and maybe that's changed a little bit, but anyway, I would love to hear about that.
Yeah. I was born and raised there, went to Hope College there. And um, fun fact, Betsy DeVos and her parents lived across the creek from us in Holland. And this was, they moved in after I had gone to college, but they were there, and that's where Betsy DeVos grew up too. She was, I think, 6 years younger than me. And I looked her up once in the Holland Christian High School yearbook, and there she was. But in any case, yeah, Holland. It was settled by Dutch religious dissidents in 1847. Uh, the thing they were dissenting from was the Dutch king's tolerance of Catholics and Jews. They could not tolerate that, and so they wanted to come to the wilderness of Michigan, where they would be separate from everybody else, and could practice their faith and their culture and language the way they wanted to. But come 1857, there was a schism in the Reformed Church, which was the main Dutch church, and it broke into two churches: the basically moderate, conservative-leaning Reformed Church in America, and then the ultra-Orthodox Christian Reformed Church, and so the Christian Reforms. They wanted to preserve the Dutch language, and they had they were a very dour bunch. They were just not fun people, really, at all. There's lots of funny stories about like when television came to Holland in the 1950s, and supposedly they would those old kind of TVs that were in the nice wooden console with the doors in front, that Christian Reforms would buy those because they could shut the door when the pastor came to call, but in any case, there was like an invisible wall in Holland. On one side was the Christian Reformed with their separate institutions. They had separate schools, separate version of the Boy Scouts, separate version of the Girl Scouts, even a separate pinky organization for student nurses at the Holland Hospital, but and you just kind of got used to it. But I realized at one point that I knew very few people on the other side of that wall because they believed in separatism, and there was one Christian Reformed kid in my neighborhood when I was growing up. and we were friends for a while, but then all of a sudden he just kind of stopped. And there was another kid who I'm pretty sure was Christian Reformed, or maybe just, his mother was. But and I don't know, 7 years old. I go and knock on his door on a Sunday afternoon and come out and play. And he comes to the door wearing a suit, says, "I'm not allowed to play outside on Sunday." And so that was the kind of place Holland was. I mean, but there was also this moderate side, that the moderate side that voted for Obama in 2008, and it was a fascinating place. I mean, it's a very pretty town. It's right on Lake Michigan, and I enjoy living there. I probably could still enjoy living there, although there was a period of time when I was very happy to leave. But yeah, that's what it was like.
Oh, and we have a question, so I'll pass it along.
Okay, I got a couple questions. In regards to her stab wound, if we're thinking it was a geologist who was the perpetrator, I'm
Yes.
just curious, like, it just seems to me especially when they're like, oh, well, she was dating a medical student. I'm like, okay. Because it just seemed like, it sounded like there was no hesitation mark. So it wasn't like just like a, eek, eek. It was one specific forceful stab.
It was a killing blow. Yeah.
In like, it seems like such a specific area instead of like, if it was someone to me that, even if you're mad, like, to me, it was almost like you had one hell of a lucky shot your first try, or he was knowledgeable about that, inflicting that wound.
I tend to think more it was just incredibly, I hate to call it luck, but it was bad luck for Betsy. But yeah, I mean, I think she was climbing backwards up the bookshelves, knocking the books off as she went, and that actually brought her right up to the right level for him to come in like that and stab her between her breasts and right into her heart. Her lungs quickly filled with blood, and but because that entry wound was so small, it hardly bled at all. That was another weird thing about the case, and I know that David Wright, the boyfriend, he felt that the state police were putting too much attention on him, in part because he was a medical student, and he cooperated for the newspaper series, but then would not return my calls when I wanted to talk to him again, for the book. He did tell me that he apparently had never told his daughter about any of this, and I sent out copies of the series to anybody who had been helpful, including him, and she apparently read it, so found it and read it, and was a little shocked, that her dad had been, part of all this. But he was a strange bird. I mean, he's had a good career as far as I know, up in Rockford, Illinois, and I feel sorry for him for having to go through this. It was just, nobody should have to go through anything like that. And I mean, just losing somebody that you apparently loved, and then becoming suspect number one for a while, for the state police, and being questioned repeatedly.
And then was he aware that she was kind of casually dating other guys?
I'm not clear about that. If she had done this in high school too, she was very, she was not a one-woman man, or one man woman, I don't know, but she liked her freedom. And I mean, I think she was really devoted to David. I don't have any real doubts about that, but she just liked to meet other people. And there is absolutely no indication that any of these other dates were sexual at all. It was just a casual night out, and it can seem shocking, but then again, sometimes it's not.
Yeah, I kind of got the impression that they were more going steady, but that, yeah, more of a, oh yeah, you can take me out for coffee or dinner, like
Yeah,
more of a friend
a friend
meeting
zone
up than
thing. Yeah,
not really romantic.
yeah.
Then my other question, bear with me, my phone fell asleep, but I remember it. Because I know you talked about how they had found like some type of like European pornography that was
Yes.
like more expensive,
Dutch
like
pornography.
yeah, like very more expensive than like the regular stuff
Yes.
you normally get. Is that something, I don't know, like is that something that people would have to send away for, or were they able to purchase that or ever? I was just wondering if there was any leads into maybe like who did purchase this and up and ran
There,
off.
I mean, it could be either one. That Sergeant Keebler never really talked about where that came from or not, but I would suspect at the time that there may have been book dealers that sold it, and you might have been able to you know send away for it and get it in a plain brown wrapper when it came back. But it was, the Netherlands had just legalized pornography as one of the weird little side things, and so this kind of stuff was available, and it was being imported into the United States. So
And then do you happen to know, was it, I guess, what I consider regular pornography, or was it more homosexual pornography? Because I know he had
yes,
a thing for little boys.
my impression was that it was more heterosexual pornography, but again, that was something that Sergeant Keebler didn't really get into, other than saying it was disgusting. So it could have been, could have been homosexual, but um, I mean, then there's the whole thing about all those, pornographic books being found in the stacks there, and it was just, it's hard to imagine. But I actually, when I did a talk at the Free Library of Philadelphia, one of the librarians there said that sort of stuff goes on here too. So
That's crazy. So
yeah,
just double check, it would have been something like people would have brought in and just randomly stuck in with regular books.
I think so. Yeah, maybe hit it up on the top shelf, for the next time they came there. Maybe they didn't feel they could keep it in their dorm room. But then again, there were people from the region who came to that library for their own nefarious purposes, and because it was seen as a safe place where you wouldn't get beat up, maybe not even arrested.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, obviously I'm a small town librarian.
Yeah.
It's a bit different, but I don't want to say I was fully surprised by those things. And in fact, there was a part of me that I don't want to say I thought it was funny. It's not funny that there's debauchery in the library, but I think people would be surprised by some of the things that go on in libraries. And when I looked at I watched one of your a small video that you did, and I watched another video where they show the stacks where Betsy was, and you can see where it is this quiet, safe space.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, in the other video I watched, the person giving the tour was a Penn State alum, and she said, "I remember working here in this library, and I was in ROTC, and I was exhausted from classes in ROTC, and I would sit down and take a little nap here sometimes."
Yeah.
And I think that that is one of the interesting things about libraries, is that you end up with these spaces that are safe and are quiet, and everyone is safe to be there. And sometimes that means that you get all of these other kind of things going on. And I really thought it was interesting in this case, because some of the things that are going on are, people are leaving pornography. We're getting things that really feel very debaucherous.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a part of me that was thinking about, when you're talking about this book, that this is a time when you mentioned, I think that there's not really like a scene for gay people in that community. It's still illegal.
At that time, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's what I mean when this is happening. And so I also think that there is a part of me that was like, good job, T library, because you're giving, at the same time that this debauchery is happening, you're also being this kind of space for people. Which is maybe not, I know that a murder happened there and such, but I do think you get all kinds of things in libraries. And I wanted to mention that stood out to me as a librarian, and also that I think that this case talks a lot about pornography and pedophilia, and a little bit touches on like homosexuality in the library, and how to me those all seem like very distinct things that were happening because of the place that that library was, but not necessarily all connected. Did anybody else have questions as I'm checking in here?
I was just curious, because I know, I think you mentioned they ended up like hiring an actual like guard to be there for permanent basis. Did they change any other like safety features? Did they like, oh, only students can come in here, or you have to, show your ID, or like it blew my mind. And I know it was, decades ago and back more in the free love era and all that. But like, I'm thinking like, shouldn't you have some type of like, I would expect on a college campus that they know who's going in and out of those doors, that you should be there per se, not just anyone coming in and out that wants to.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, when I was doing the research for the book, there was no card required, to come in or go down to the stacks or anything like that, and so I think there's been a lot of resistance to making it too onerous, and I mean, I know some libraries have gone that direction or closed off the stacks to free access, but so far Penn State is hanging in there.
So in other words, none of us should want to enroll there, correct?
Well, I can't answer that question, but
Fair.
It's a good school in many ways, but they have some institutional problems.
Well, and I think too, as I'm mentioning some of that stuff, there is a part of me that says, I think that that's a whole question about libraries in general, is when you allow a place to be open and free for everyone to come, and especially in the Penn State Library, when you have just structural problems where there are these little alcoves of stacks that are very out of the way and secluded. That's a very gray thing of how are you protecting the people in the library, but also protecting the whole community by opening that information up to everyone and making sure everybody has access to it. So in some ways, like you said, Penn State has resisted shutting down, and I could see in some ways where that is a good thing, that Penn State is, and our large library here for the university, you have access to it as a public member, and I do think that that's wonderful as a librarian, that we have that resource in our community. So maybe we just need a personal bodyguard the next time we go, right?
When
But
I
I
was
also love that someone was able to take a nap in the stacks of the library too, so.
Well, I do have that story in the book about that student woman who dozed off in the stacks, woke up and the lights were all out, the librarians had turned out the lights and gone home. So that had to be a little bit scary.
I would think so, especially in a library that big. And as I would say, I will share your video so that everybody can get like on our Facebook page, because until I really saw how secluded that area is, you don't realize that it would be scary. And especially your video is a more recent one, to imagine that on top of everything else, it was kind of dark back there and the lighting wasn't good. It really is like a very twisty, narrow, scary place. Yeah.
And be easy to hide and jump out at somebody, not hard at all. And easy to get lost down there. I mean, it took me several visits there before I really felt comfortable being able to walk into where I wanted to go and then find my way out again because of the way that building had been built. And the structure had been, there were like 3 different parts of it and built at different times, and they had never been rationalized, so it was just too easy to wander off in the wrong direction.
Mhm. Yeah, I could see that for sure. Well, I would like to end our discussion there just because we've got about 10 minutes left for me to give everybody their book for next month and go over a couple of housekeeping details. But I just want to make sure nobody has any last minute questions. You have a question? Oh yeah, please.
They got cameras right there right now, right? I mean, coming in and coming out.
Probably. I'm not entirely sure. There were no cameras in the stacks
Back
in
then.
1969, and until the state police put that one up there that everybody knew what it was, but I mean, that would make sense. But then again, you have to have somebody watch the monitor screens, and the library's big. There's a lot. Can you really cover the entire thing with video cameras? It's just, there's no easy answers.
Oh, but a case like that's probably unlikely to happen in our times right now, right? Given that we have, most,
I would say it's less likely. Yeah. Yeah.
I would like to think it does. I was actually talking about Richard, your suspect, who I would agree with you is probably more than a suspect. And they were saying, wow, it really feels like you could just get away with anything. And that's how it feels. And I would like to hope that we have security cameras and different things, and that if this happened today, because I think that is part of the tragedy of this whole thing, is that no one was ever brought to justice for it. And I have to say, I really do appreciate your book and how much it focuses on Betsy, because and we were just talking before the meeting how normally we have a lot of different sources. So if you're struggling to get a book read for the month, you've got documentaries and different things that you can watch, and there really isn't a ton on Betsy. It's you're kind of the voice, and so while I feel like we don't have, there was not justice in this case, it does feel that getting to know Betsy through the book and through the voice of all of the people that you interviewed has allowed us to have hopefully some sense of justice for her. And it sounds like she was, as you have captured her, such a very interesting and complicated woman. My mother was going to college at the same time. So I think of her and just how she wanted to go to medical school and be in the Peace Corps, and at the same time kind of was considering, settling down and being a wife and mother and following, her medical student fiance to Penn State and
becoming an English teacher, and yeah.
So I just really appreciate all that you've put together to give us that for Betsy. So I would just like to give you a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you
for coming and for sharing your story.
Thank you.
And with that, I will end our session. Thank you so much for coming.
Okay.
And we hope to hear from you. Would you actually, before you go, you said you had a new book. Would you share your new project just a bit with us?
It's called Saving Han-Tak Lee, Korean Friends, American Lawyers, and One Tough Scientist Reversed a Miscarriage of Justice. Han-Tak Lee was a Korean businessman in New York City. His daughter, who was a student at Pratt Institute, suffered from manic depression. After an incident at home, he took her to a Korean church camp where she underwent an exorcism. The cabin caught fire and she died. He was charged with the murder with basically very little valid evidence. It's an exploration of exoneration, of bad science versus good science, and looks a lot at Koreans in America. And I don't have a publisher yet, but hopefully soon.
That sounds incredibly interesting. So we will be on the lookout for that
Okay.
for
All right.
sure. All right. Well, thank you. Hmm? Oh, and we have we also, funny thing at the end of our group, we have a puppy come in, and we have a puppy therapy time to
Oh,
de-stress. So our therapy dog is here. So I will let you go. Thank you so much,
Okay.
David. One more
All
round
right.
of
Thank you.
applause.
Bye now.
Yep. Bye now.